It was a cold Tuesday morning in Houston, Texas, when Dr. Sarah Voss first heard the beeping. She had been sitting at her desk for 3 hours already, drinking her fourth cup of coffee and staring at old data files she had memorized years ago. The NASA Deep Space Monitoring Center was quiet at that hour. Most of the staff didn't come in until 9, and Sarah liked the silence. She liked the way the hum of the machines felt like a heartbeat, steady and reliable, while everything outside those walls felt like it was falling apart. The world in 2041 was not doing well. Climate zones had shifted so dramatically that entire cities in the American South had been relocated. Food shortages were hitting parts of Europe and Asia. 3 small wars were burning in different corners of the world, all of them, at their root, about water and land. Politicians gave speeches. Scientists gave warnings. And most ordinary people were just trying to get through their days without looking too hard at the news. Sarah had stopped watching the news 2 years ago. She found comfort in space instead, in the cold, quiet certainty of stars that had burned for billions of years before humans ever walked the Earth and would keep burning long after humanity was gone. There was something honest about that. Something that didn't lie to you or promise things it couldn't deliver. She was 51 years old. She had spent her entire career at NASA, starting as a data analyst fresh out of MIT and slowly climbing until she was the head of the Deep Space Communication Division. She had a daughter named Lily who lived in Portland and called every Sunday, and an ex-husband named Mark who had once told her she loved space more than she loved people. She had never been able to argue with him about that. The beeping started at 6:47 in the morning. At first she thought it was her phone. She reached over without looking and tapped the screen. The beeping continued. She looked up. The signal board on the far wall, the one that monitored communication frequencies from registered deep space probes and vessels, was lit up with a single blinking orange. Orange meant incoming transmission. Unconfirmed origin. She set down her coffee and walked over slowly, as if she were unsure whether something was real or if she had simply been staring at screens too long and her brain was playing tricks on her. She looked at the coordinates. She looked at the signal frequency. Then she looked at the registration code attached to the incoming transmission. Her hands went cold. The registration code was UES, Meridian 7. She read it again. And again. And one more time. Because the human brain sometimes refuses to accept information that it is already classified as impossible. UES, Meridian 7. The United Earthship Meridian. Registration code confirmed. The signal was authenticated by 3 separate systems within seconds of each other, each pinging back the same result. Sarah stood very still for a long moment. Outside the window, the first light of the morning was just beginning to touch the Houston skyline. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. A janitor pushed a cart down a hallway, the wheels squeaking softly. She picked up the phone on the wall and called Director James Colt at home. He picked up on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. "Colt," he said. "James," she said. "You need to come in right now." A pause. "Sarah, it's not even 7. James." Her voice was completely flat, completely steady. The way a person's voice gets when they are holding something enormous inside their chest, and they cannot afford to let it spill. The Meridian is transmitting. Silence on the line. A long, long silence. Then, "I'll be there in 15 minutes. She hung up and turned back to the screen. The orange kept blinking. Patient. Steady. It seemed as if it had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. This event could be attributed to the U.S. Meridian's launch 22 years ago. It had carried a crew of 47 people, scientists, engineers, pilots, doctors, and one journalist named Ray Cole, who had won a lottery to be the first civilian in deep space. It had been Earth's most ambitious mission, a journey beyond the solar system, through a theoretical fold in space-time that NASA physicists had spent a decade calculating and arguing about. The mission was supposed to last 18 months. They were going to test the drive, collect data, and come home. They had never come home. 14 months after launch, the Meridian had gone silent. No distress signal. No final transmission. No wreckage was ever found. Just silence, as if the ship had sailed off the edge of the known universe and kept going. After 3 years of searching, NASA had officially declared the crew lost. 47 names on a memorial wall in the lobby downstairs. 47 families who had buried empty caskets or carried grief with no grave to visit. That had been 19 years ago. And now the ship was calling. By the time Director Colt arrived, Sarah had already run the authentication sequence 4 times. She had called in her 2 best analysts, Tom Reyes and Dana Park, both of whom were now standing at their stations with the kind of focused silence that meant they understood the weight of what they were looking at and were choosing to feel it later. "It's real," Tom said quietly, not looking up from his screen. "Signal origin is consistent with a vessel moving at sublight speed, approximately 6.3 million kilometers from Earth. At the current trajectory and speed, they'll be within visual range of our orbital telescopes in about 11 hours. 11 hours, Colt repeated. He was a big man, Director Colt. Broad shoulders, silver hair, and the kind of face that had been trained over decades to show nothing when everything was happening. But right now, standing in the blue glow of the monitoring screens, he looked like a man who had just been handed something he didn't have a category for. "Is anyone else picking this signal up?" he asked. "Not yet," Dana said. "The frequency they're transmitting on is an old NASA protocol. Most modern systems wouldn't even recognize it. We almost didn't." "Almost," Sarah said softly. She was still looking at the blinking orange. 22 years. 47 people. An empty wall of names downstairs. "Of SYMJHY," she whispered under her breath, a phrase she had picked up years ago from a Pakistani colleague who used to say it when something changed everything. From now on, everything is different. She didn't know yet how right she was. Within 2 hours of Sarah's call, the Deep Space Monitoring Center had gone from a quiet morning building to something that looked more like a war room. Director Colt had made 3 phone calls, to the Secretary of Defense, to the President's Chief Science Advisor, and to the head of the Joint Chiefs. All 3 of those calls had resulted in more phone calls, which had resulted in black SUVs pulling up to the building and people in suits and uniforms walking very quickly down hallways. Sarah didn't like any of them. She had spent her career working around people who wore their authority like armor. People who walked into a room and immediately started calculating how to take it over. She understood why they were here. A ship that had been missing for 22 years doesn't come back without attracting that kind of attention, but she also understood that the moment the suits took over, the science would become secondary. It always did. She stayed at her station and kept working. The signal was growing stronger. The meridian was moving toward Earth at a steady pace, not the emergency burn of a damaged ship limping home, but something deliberate, controlled. Whatever condition the ship was in, whoever was flying it, they were making a choice to come back at this exact speed. Tom had run the numbers 3 times. "They could be here in 4 hours if they increase speed," he told Sarah quietly. "They're choosing not to. They're taking their time." "Why?" Dana asked. Nobody answered. Around 9 in the morning, a woman named Colonel Rita Hayes arrived. She was military, Air Force, attached to something called the Special Aerospace Incidents Division, which Sarah had never heard of. Hayes was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, and wore her dark hair pulled back with the kind of tightness that suggested she hadn't worn it any other way in 20 years. She walked straight to Sarah's station without introducing herself to anyone else. "Dr. Voss," she said. "Walk me through what you know." Sarah looked at her for a moment. Then she walked her through it, the signal, the authentication, the trajectory, all of it. Hayes listened without interrupting once, which Sarah respected more than she expected to. When Sarah finished, Hayes said, "Have you attempted two-way contact?" "Multiple times," Sarah said. No response. "They're transmitting a single looping signal, the registration code, their current coordinates, and one other element." "What element?" Sarah turned back to her screen and pulled up the secondary data stream. "This," she said. It was a sequence. Not Morse code, not any human language. A mathematical pattern, prime numbers cascading into something more complex, folding into each other in a way that made Tom's hands shake slightly when he first decoded it. "What is that?" Hayes asked. "We don't fully know yet," Sarah admitted. "But the base structure is a prime sequence, which means it's not random. Somebody built this structure. And the deeper you go into it, the more it looks like..." She hesitated. Like what? Hayes pressed. Like instructions, Tom said from his station. He didn't look up. Like somebody is trying to teach us something. And they're starting from the very beginning. Like they're not sure how much we know. The room went quiet. On the wall across from Sarah's station were photographs. They had been there since the memorial was established, small framed headshots of each of the 47 crew members of the Meridian. Mission Commander Elena Rodriguez, Chief Engineer Paul Shute, and Dr. Marcus Webb, the ship's doctor. Ray Cole, the journalist, was 29 years old when he left and smiled at the camera like a man who had just won everything. Sarah looked at those photographs every single day. She had been on the ground team during the Meridian's launch. She had watched the ship rise on the enormous monitor in mission control and felt a kind of joy she couldn't fully describe, a lifting feeling, like the whole human race was going somewhere. And then they had gone silent. And the joy had turned into grief, and the grief had calcified over the years into something quieter and harder and permanent. She turned away from the photographs and back to her screen. "There's something else," she said. "Something I haven't told anyone yet, because I wanted to run it more than once." Hayes looked at her. "The ship's mass signature," Sarah said quietly. "We're picking it up now through gravitational displacement readings. The Meridian left Earth with a gross mass of approximately 42,000 metric tons. Fully fueled, fully loaded." "And," Hayes said. Sarah pulled up the displacement reading. "It's coming back with a mass of approximately 680,000 metric tons." The number sat in the air like a stone dropped in still water. Hayes stared at the reading. "That's 16 times the original mass." "Yes," Sarah said. "What is it carrying?" "Caro," Sarah said softly, using the word the way her colleague had taught her, not as a name but as a marker, a line in the story where everything turns. Here. This moment is where it changes. That is the question. By noon, the orbital telescope images started coming in. They appeared on the main display screen in slow, building detail, first as a smear of light, then as a shape, then as something that stopped every conversation in the room and held it there like a caught breath. The Meridian had been a beautiful ship. Sarah remembered it clearly from the launch, long and sleek, built like a deep-sea vessel adapted for vacuum, with a cylindrical main hull, 2 rotating habitat rings, and the enormous full-drive housing at the rear that had been the cutting edge of human engineering when it launched. It had been about 400 meters long. It had looked powerful and precise, and it was deeply, unmistakably human. What was coming back was different. The main hull was still there. You could see it if you knew what you were looking for. The original cylindrical shape of the Meridian was visible underneath, and within the larger structure, like the skeleton of something that had been rebuilt around itself. But something else entirely surrounded it, grew from it, and integrated with it in ways that none of them could immediately understand. The ship was now enormous. Where the Meridian had been 400 meters long, this vessel appeared to be nearly 2 kilometers from end to end. Structures had been added, or grown, because added implied a process that looked familiar, and nothing about what they were seeing looked familiar. That extended in flowing, curved shapes from the original hull. There were no hard angles, no bolts or seams or welds. Everything was smooth and continuous, as if the ship had been sculpted from a single material rather than assembled from parts. And it was glowing slightly. Not brightly. Not the way a star glows or a flame does. More like the way certain deep-sea creatures glow, a faint, internal luminescence that pulsed very slowly, as if the ship itself were breathing. Nobody in the room spoke for almost a full minute. Then General Marcus Ford, who had arrived an hour earlier and taken up a position near the back of the room with 3 aides, said in a very controlled voice, "Is that our ship?" "The registration signal is coming from that vessel," Dana said carefully. "The hull origin matches. The mass displacement matches what we calculated earlier." "That doesn't answer my question," Ford said. "Yes," Sarah said. "It does." She stood up straighter and studied the image on the screen. Every instinct she had as a scientist was firing at once, wonder and caution and a deep, hungry need to understand. This discovery was what she had given her life to. Not for a moment like this specifically, you couldn't prepare for a moment like this, but for the kind of work that made a moment like this possible. They transformed it, she said. Somehow, out there, wherever they went, they transformed the ship. Or something transformed it for them, Tom said quietly. Or something transformed it for them, Sarah agreed.
They.
Colonel Hayes stepped forward. We need to establish communication.
Now.
Whatever is on that ship, whatever or whoever, we need to be talking to them before they get within orbital distance. We've been trying, Sarah said. Continuously. Try harder, Hayes said. It doesn't work that way. And then every screen in the room changed. The looping registration signal that had been transmitting since that morning went silent. For 2 seconds there was nothing, just the hiss of open frequency and the quiet static of space. And then a voice came through the speakers. A human voice. A woman's voice, slightly rough, slightly tired, but completely steady. Unmistakably human. Unmistakably alive. Houston. This is Commander Elena Rodriguez of the U.S. Meridian. We are returning home. We are all alive, all 47 of us. Please do not be afraid of what you see. Please do not be afraid of us. We have a tremendous deal to tell you, and we need you to be calm when we land, because what we are bringing back is going to change everything. A pause. We are not a threat. We are still human. We are still your people. Another pause. Shorter. But we have seen things. We have learned things. And the world you knew when we left, it is not going to be the same world after we come home. I'm sorry for that. But I believe, with everything I am, that it will be better. The transmission ended. The room was completely silent. Sarah realized she had both her hands pressed flat against her console, as if she needed to feel something solid beneath her palms. Her heart was moving fast. Her eyes burned slightly, like when you hold back something that has been waiting a long time. 47 people. All alive. She looked at the photographs on the wall. Elena Rodriguez's face, confident, dark-eyed, smiling that particular smile of someone who carries enormous responsibility and has made peace with it. HFY, Sarah whispered again. This time, she knew exactly what it meant. They had 11 hours notice, which was both a lot and almost nothing at all. In those 11 hours, the United States government went from contained awareness to controlled chaos to something that could only be described as a very expensive, very powerful attempt to manage the unmanageable. The president was briefed. The UN Secretary-General was briefed. The heads of state of the G20 nations were called. Military assets were quietly repositioned. Airspace over a 200-mile radius around Edwards Air Force Base in California, the designated landing site, was locked down hard. And despite all of that, despite every effort to keep things quiet just a little longer, the internet found out by 2 p.m. It started with an amateur radio operator in Nevada named Dave Kowalski, who had been scanning deep space frequencies as a hobby for 12 years and had picked up the Meridian's transmission 30 seconds after it started. He posted about it online before anyone from the government had even made their second phone call. By noon it had been shared 8 million times. By 2 it was on every news channel in the world. By 4, the crowd gathering outside Edwards Air Force Base stretched for 3 miles in every direction. Sarah watched the news coverage on a small screen at the corner of her station and felt a complicated mix of emotions, frustration at the security breach because there were good reasons to have controlled this, and something else, something quieter, that felt almost like relief. Because this belonged to everyone. It had always belonged to everyone. She was on a transport to Edwards by 5 p.m., along with Director Colt, Colonel Hayes, General Ford, and a rotating cast of people in suits who all seemed to be on their phones constantly and whom Sarah had already mentally sorted into 2 categories, the ones who wanted to understand what was happening and the ones who wanted to control it. The drive to the base took 3 times as long as it should have because the roads were packed. People had come from everywhere, from Las Vegas, from Los Angeles, from as far as San Francisco, and they were standing in the desert heat with their phones held up like offerings, waiting. Some of them had signs. Most of them just had their eyes wide and fixed on the sky. Sarah pressed her face to the window of the SUV and watched them. These were her people. Not in a political sense, not in a tribal sense, in the most fundamental sense. These were humans, gathered in the desert on a Tuesday evening because something enormous was happening and they wanted to be close to it. Because the pull of something real, something true, something that defied the ordinary weight of daily life. That pull was universal. You couldn't legislate it or contain it. They arrived at the base at 7:20 p.m. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of copper and deep red. The landing strip had been cleared and marked. A perimeter of military vehicles formed a wide ring around it. Scientists and engineers from half a dozen agencies moved through temporary stations, setting up instruments and cameras and communication relays. At 8:45 p.m., the meridian appeared in the sky. Not as a moving star. It appeared as a shape, vast and unmistakable, dropping through the atmosphere with a smooth, controlled precision that made no sense for something of its size. There should have been sonic booms. The air should have screamed as something enormous moved fast, pushing it out of the way. Instead, there was only a deep, low vibration, not a sound exactly, more of a feeling, something you registered in your chest and your teeth, as the ship descended. The crowd outside the perimeter went absolutely silent. Millions of people watching on screens around the world went silent. The meridian, or the thing that contained the meridian, settled onto the landing strip with a gentleness that was almost tender. The glowing pulse of its hull cast a pale blue-white light across the desert, illuminating the dust and the faces of the people watching, and for a moment everything looked like something out of a dream, the kind of dream you have when you are running a fever, where ordinary things become luminous and strange and fill you with a feeling you can't quite name but will remember forever. Sarah stood in the press area designated for senior staff and watched it land. She was crying. She hadn't realized until she felt the wetness on her face, cool in the desert evening air. She wiped it away quickly, and nobody mentioned it. For a long moment, nothing happened. The ship sat there, breathing its slow pulse of light. The military vehicles held their positions. The cameras rolled. Then, on the side of the hull, in the section that was unmistakably the original meridian beneath all the new additions, an opening appeared. It is not a mechanical hatch grinding open on hinges. The material of the hull simply parted, the way water parts around a hand, smooth and effortless, and a ramp extended to the ground. And they walked out. 47 people. They walked out in a single file, unhurried, looking around at the desert, the crowd, the cameras, the military vehicles, and the bleeding sunset sky, with expressions of people who have returned to something they once knew and are measuring how much it has changed in their absence. They looked healthy. More than healthy, actually, they looked remarkable. All of them. Skin clear, posture relaxed, eyes sharp and bright. There were no visible injuries, no signs of hardship. A few of them looked younger than their mission photographs, which was impossible, and yet it was true. Commander Elena Rodriguez walked at the front. She is now 61 years old. She had been 39 when she launched. She looked 50, maybe, but a strong, vibrant 50, not the kind worn down by 22 years of whatever they had been through. She wore a version of the original mission uniform, modified in subtle ways that suggested she had been living in it long enough to make it her own. Her dark hair was streaked with gray. Her eyes were steady. She walked up to the military barrier and stopped. General Ford stepped forward. They looked at each other. "Commander Rodriguez," he said.
"General," she said.
Her voice was the same as the transmission, clear, slightly rough, and completely calm. "We're home." "You are," he said. And then, because he was a soldier and a professional, and he had held himself together through an entire day of the most extraordinary events of his lifetime, he said, "Welcome back." Behind Elena, the journalist Ray Cole, who had left Earth at 29 and now looked somewhere around 40, was looking out at the distant crowd beyond the perimeter. He was smiling. He had the look of a man who had a story to tell and already knew it was the most important story in human history and who was simply waiting for the moment he could begin. Caro. Here the world split in two. The world before the Meridian landed and the world after. Nothing would ever be the same again. They weren't debriefed in a conference room. General Ford had wanted that, a controlled, structured, classified debriefing with a prepared list of questions and a team of analysts taking notes behind one-way glass. Colonel Hayes had agreed. The suits had all agreed. Sarah had said nothing, because she had learned a long time ago that when everyone in a room is agreeing on something that feels wrong, you don't win by arguing immediately. You wait. Commander Rodriguez had made the decision simple. When Ford explained the proposed debriefing setup, she listened politely and then said, with no particular emphasis, "That won't work. What we need to tell you isn't something that fits in a conference room. And honestly, General, if you try to classify what we're about to share, you'll find it's already too late." Ford had frowned. "What does that mean?" Elena had smiled slightly. "It means what I said." They ended up in the main hangar, a space large enough to hold the meeting and a portion of the scientific team. Sarah made sure she was in the room. Elena had asked for her specifically, which had surprised Sarah until Elena said, quietly during the initial handshake, "You kept the monitoring station pointed at our last known trajectory even after they officially ended the search. For 19 years. Someone told me." Sarah had felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. "Of course I did," she said. Elena squeezed her hand once. Then she turned to face the assembled room. She stood in front of them without notes, without a presentation, without anything except herself and 22 years of experience that showed in every line of her face and every word she chose. "I'm going to tell you what happened," she said. "All of it. Starting from the beginning." The room went completely quiet. 14 months after launch, we achieved the fold, she said. The drive worked exactly as calculated. For approximately 4 seconds of ship time, which translated to slightly over 3 weeks of Earth time, we moved through compressed space-time. When we came out on the other side, we were approximately 12 light-years from Earth, in the outer boundary of a star system we had no name for. Silence. Someone near the back coughed once, and then went still. The system had 7 planets. The 4th planet from the star was inhabited. She said it simply, without drama, the way you state a fact you have lived with long enough that its weight has become ordinary to you. By a civilization approximately 1,400 years more advanced than ours. The room absorbed her words. They detected us immediately, Elena continued. We were not subtle. A full drive entry into an inhabited system is, apparently, quite loud. They sent a vessel to meet us within 6 hours. A single, small vessel carrying 3 individuals. They did not come armed. They came with what I can only describe as curiosity.
She paused.
First contact, she said, was nothing like the movies. There was no instant universal translator. There was no immediate threat or demand. There were just 3 beings, patient and quiet, floating in space a few hundred meters from our ship, waiting to see what we would do. What did you do? Sarah asked. Elena looked at her. We opened a channel. We transmitted mathematics and they responded. A brief pause. It took us 4 months to build enough shared language to have a real conversation. During those 4 months, they kept their distance, fed us data through electromagnetic transmission, and waited. For months, General Ford said. You made contact 4 months in and didn't try to transmit back to Earth? We tried, Elena said calmly. Our long-range communication array had been damaged during the fold, a problem we hadn't anticipated. We couldn't transmit over that distance with the equipment we had. And before you ask, we did not ask them for help immediately because we were 4 months into learning their language, and we did not yet fully understand what asking them for something would mean. Ford nodded slowly. They are called. Elena paused, and she made a sound that no human throat could reproduce exactly. The closest translation is the remembers. They call themselves that because their civilization is built around the concept of preserved knowledge. Every discovery they have ever made, every scientific breakthrough, every philosophical development, every lessons learned from every mistake are recorded, maintained, and taught. Nothing is lost. Nothing is forgotten. It is the foundation of everything they are. How long have they been around? Tom Reyes asked. He had somehow gotten into the room. Sarah saw him in the back, pressed against the wall, with his notebook out. Their civilization is approximately 40,000 years old, Elena said. The number moved through the room like a cold current. They have made contact with 11 other civilizations, Elena said. 4 of them no longer exist. 3 destroyed themselves, different methods, same root cause. They developed technology faster than they developed wisdom. One was destroyed by a natural event. Two exist but declined ongoing contact, and two are active partners of the Remembers. And us, someone asked from behind. Elena looked toward the voice. They have known about us for approximately 600 years, she said. They've been watching, deciding whether to make contact. The decision is never made lightly for them. They've watched civilizations destroy themselves before, and they've learned that timing matters. They were watching us and waiting. Waiting for what? Sarah asked quietly. Waiting to see if we were going to make it, Elena said. Silence. And, Sarah said. Elena held her gaze for a moment. The jury is still out, she said honestly. That's one of the things they wanted me to tell you. Caro, here, Elena paused, and in that pause, every person in the room understood that they were no longer sitting in a debriefing. They were sitting at the most important conversation in the history of their species. The next morning, they opened the ship. Not to military inspection. Elena had been clear about that, with a quiet firmness that brooked no argument. The technology on this ship is not a weapon, she had said. It is not a military asset. If we point what we've brought back at each other, we have failed the Remembers test.
Four had pushed back on that.
Hayes had pushed back. 3 different government officials had pushed back. Elena had listened to all of them with the patience of someone who had spent years learning to communicate across the boundaries of entirely different civilizations, and therefore found disagreement with members of her own species relatively manageable. In the end, a compromise was reached. A joint team, scientists, engineers, 2 military observers in an advisory capacity, and Sarah would enter the ship together.
No weapons taken in.
Everything is documented, recorded, and shared across a consortium of international scientific institutions simultaneously, not funneled through a single government first. Elena had agreed to that. She had, Sarah suspected, been counting on exactly that outcome. Sarah stepped onto the ship at 9:14 in the morning. The ramp was smooth under her feet. Not metallic, not plastic, but something between the two, with a very slight warmth to it, the way a surface holds warmth after the sun has been on it. The interior of the ship was not dark. It was filled with a soft, even light that seemed to come from the walls themselves rather than from any fixed source. The light was neither warm nor cold. It was simply clear, the kind of light in which you could see everything without any shadows. The original sections of the Meridian were immediately recognizable. The crew quarters, the command deck layout, and the engineering corridors, they were still there, still structured the way they had been when the ship launched, though everything had been maintained with a care that spoke of years of habitation. It was the same way a house looks when someone has lived in it lovingly for a long time, worn in the right places, attended to, made into a home. But beyond those original sections, the ship was something else entirely. There were rooms aboard that had no parallel in human engineering. Chambers whose walls were covered in a material that responded to proximity. As you walked toward it, the surface would shift, restructuring itself into complex geometric patterns that changed depending on the angle you approached from. Sarah reached out to touch one wall, and it was warm and faintly vibrating, and her hand left a mark that slowly, over the course of about 10 seconds, smoothed itself away like water returning to calm. "What is this material?" she asked Elena, who was walking beside her. "We don't have a word for it," Elena said. "The Remembers call it something that translates roughly as living structure. It's not alive in the biological sense. It doesn't have cells or metabolism. But it exhibits a kind of adaptive intelligence. It responds to its environment. It optimizes itself constantly." "They gave this to you?" Sarah said. "They taught us how to make it," Elena said. There was an important difference in that, and her tone made clear she knew it. They walked deeper in. There was a room that Elena called the power core. It occupied the center of the ship's expanded section, a sphere approximately 30 meters in diameter. In the middle of the sphere, suspended without any visible support, was something that looked almost like a crystal, irregular, faceted, deep blue-black in color, roughly the size of a refrigerator. It pulsed with the same slow rhythm as the ship's exterior glow. "That is a zero-point energy condenser," Elena said. "It draws power from the quantum vacuum, from the energy that exists in empty space at the subatomic level. The Remembers have been using this technology for 800 years. One condenser of this size can power a city of 2 million people indefinitely. Dr. James Park, one of the physicists on the joint team, had been silent since they entered the ship.
He spoke now.
His voice was cautious. Indefinitely as in no fuel source? No fuel source, Elena confirmed. No waste. No emissions. No depletion. Park turned and looked at Sarah. His face was completely controlled except for his eyes, which were doing the same thing her eyes had done the previous morning at her monitoring station, refusing to believe what they were reading. One of these units, Elena said, can be built with materials available on Earth. We brought back full technical specifications. Materials list, construction sequence, calibration protocols. Everything. How many specs did you bring back? Sarah asked. Elena looked at her steadily. HFY, from now on, you are going to need to think about technology differently, she said. It is not a series of single discoveries. What we brought back is a system. Everything connects to everything else. The power technology connects to the material science. The material science connects to the medical technology. The medical technology connects to food systems. The food systems connect to climate restoration capabilities. A pause. We brought back 37 complete technical systems, Elena said. Each one is revolutionary on its own. Together, they are comprehensive enough to solve every major crisis currently threatening human civilization. The room was absolutely silent. Outside, through the hull of the ship, Sarah could feel, not hear, but feel, the steady, living pulse of the vessel around them. Caro, right here. This exact moment. This was the line. While Elena was walking scientists through the ship, Ray Cole was sitting in a folding chair in a quiet corner of the hangar, and he was talking to Sarah's analyst, Dana Park. He had asked for Dana specifically, not any of the officials, not the military observers, not the government representatives. Dana, who had been on Sarah's team for 6 years, and who had the particular gift of listening without interrupting, of making a person feel genuinely heard. Someone had told Ray about her.
He wouldn't say who.
Dana had brought a recorder. Ray had been fine with that. He sat in the folding chair with a cup of coffee, his first Earth coffee in 22 years, which he said tasted completely different from how he remembered it in a good way, and he told Dana what it had been like. I want to tell you about the first time I stood on their planet, he said. Please, Dana said. It took us about a year before they invited us down, he said. A full year of communication, building trust, and mutual observation. When the invitation finally came, Elena picked 5 of us to go first. She included me, which surprised me.
Why?
Because I wasn't a scientist, he said. I was a journalist. And when I asked her about it, she said, that's precisely why I'm choosing you. I need someone who will describe what it looks like, not just what it means. He smiled at that memory. The surface of their world was nothing like any description of an alien planet you've ever read or seen. It wasn't strange-colored or hostile-looking. It was beautiful in a way that was almost familiar, the way a dream can feel like somewhere you've actually been. The sky was deeper blue than ours, almost violet at the edges. The vegetation was green, mostly, with variations toward gold and deep red in certain seasons. There was water, oceans, rivers, rain. He took a sip of his coffee. But the cities, he said. The cities were what undid me. What were they like? Dana asked. They were integrated, he said carefully, working to find the right words. Not just into the landscape, into everything. The buildings weren't separate from the natural world. They were extensions of it. The same living material you've probably seen on the ship. It covers everything. The streets, the structures, the public spaces. It breathes. It adjusts. It maintains itself. A building on their world doesn't degrade over time. It evolves. It becomes more itself as the decades pass.
He paused.
There were no slums, he said. I looked. I specifically went looking because I'm a journalist, and slums are where the truth of a civilization lives. There were none. Not because they were hidden, because they didn't exist. The systems that distribute resources on their world they're not what we would call a political system or an economic system. They're more like the systems of a healthy body, where resources go where they're needed automatically because that's how the whole organism survives. Did they always have it this way? Dana asked. Ray shook his head.
No.
That was one of the most important things they taught us. They used to be like us. 8,000 years ago, they had wars. They faced poverty, inequality, environmental destruction, and the same patterns we see today. And they came within 200 years of destroying themselves completely, a cascade of crises that was almost identical to what we're currently facing. He set down his cup. And they made it through, he said. They survived their own worst impulses. They survived not through one leader, one revolution, or one discovery. It was a long, painful, incremental process of learning. They made mistakes, recorded them honestly, and taught the next generation to avoid repeating those errors. It was the decision, made 8,000 years ago, that nothing important would ever be forgotten again. That's why they call themselves the Rememberers, Dana said softly. Yes, Ray said. And that's what they want to give us. Not just the technology is almost secondary. What they really want to provide us is the practice of remembering, of recording what we know and what we've done wrong and what we've learned, and keeping it. Really keeping it. He looked at his hands for a moment. One of their people, he said, a woman or the nearest thing to a woman their species has, sat with me for 3 months toward the end of our stay. She was something like their version of a historian. Her name was, loosely, Remembrance of the Long Dark. She told me about each civilization the Rememberers had watched destroy itself. In detail. She did not spare the difficult parts. She wanted me to understand what the pattern looked like from the outside. What did it look like? Dana asked. Ray looked up. Like us, he said simply. Every single time. Smart, creative, capable people who built extraordinary things and then couldn't agree on how to share them. Who let short-term thinking overwhelm long-term. Who knew what they needed to do and couldn't make themselves do it fast enough. A long pause. She told me she hoped we were different, he said. She said she had watched us for a long time, and she thought there was something in us, some quality she didn't have a word for in any language we shared, that the other civilizations hadn't had. A stubbornness. A refusal to accept finality. She said she thought maybe that was what would save us. He picked up his coffee again and held it with both hands, looking at it as if it were something precious. HFY, he said quietly. He had picked up the phrase somewhere on the ship from one of the crew. That's what she wanted me to tell people. HFY. From now on. If we want to make it, it starts from now. Not at some perfect future moment when everything is ready. Right now. The crisis came on the 3rd day. It came the way these things always come, not with a bang but with a leak. Specifically, 3 classified intelligence documents appeared on an anonymous server at 2 a.m. These documents had been prepared by an analyst inside the Department of Defense who had decided, unilaterally, that the American public needed to know something the government was keeping from them. The documents were not wrong about what they described. They were mistaken about almost everything else. What the documents claimed, the Meridian crew had been altered by the alien civilization. Biologically modified. The alien civilization had altered the Meridian crew in ways that rendered them no longer fully human. The document used the word compromise. It used the phrase potential vectors. It said, in the dry clinical language of threat assessment, cannot rule out the possibility of a long-term infiltration strategy designed to introduce foreign influence into key decision-making structures. By 6 a.m., the story was everywhere. Sarah found out when her phone started ringing and didn't stop. She read the documents at her kitchen table in the guest housing on base, drinking coffee she didn't taste, going through each page carefully. Then she put the phone down and sat for a minute. She was angry. Not the hot, reactive kind of rage, the cold kind. The kind that comes when you have worked for something for a very long time, and you can feel it being threatened by something small and frightened. She got dressed and drove to the hangar. Elena was already there. So was Ray. So were several of the other crew members. She recognized Paul Shute, the chief engineer, and Dr. Marcus Webb, the ship's doctor. They were gathered in a quiet cluster near the ship's ramp, and they were reading the same documents on a tablet that someone had brought them. Elena looked up when Sarah walked over. How bad? Elena asked. Bad, Sarah said honestly. The crowds outside the base are already reacting. There are counter-protests. Someone threw a rock through a window in the town nearest the base. Cable news has had every talking head in the country on for the last 2 hours. Elena nodded slowly. They're not wrong that we've changed, she said quietly. We have changed. Of course we've changed after spending 22 years away from Earth, living in another civilization, and learning things that restructured our understanding of reality. Anyone would. Have you been biologically modified? Sarah asked. She said it directly because that was the question, and there was no use in going around it. Elena met her eyes. Yes. Sarah waited. The rememberers offered us medical treatments, Elena said. About 3 years in, after we had been living among them long enough to understand what they were offering and why. The treatments work at the cellular level. They correct certain types of accumulated genetic damage and extend what they call the active period of biological function. The crew voted on it individually. Everyone was given full information. Everyone chose freely. 39 of us accepted. 8 declined. What do the treatments do, practically? Sarah asked. They slow the aging process, Elena said. Significantly. And they correct the kind of cellular deterioration that leads to cancer and organ failure and the degenerative diseases that currently kill most humans in their 60s and 70s. Sarah sat with that for a moment. How long? She asked. The rememberers who have lived with these treatments for their full lives, Elena said carefully, have lifespans of approximately 300 to 400 years. With continued access to the treatment protocols, which can be reproduced on Earth, the same 300 to 400 years is theoretically achievable for humans. The silence between them was very full. That, Sarah said slowly, will be harder for people to process than the energy technology. Yes, Elena said. I know. That's why the documents are getting traction, Sarah said. It's not really about the infiltration theory. That's a container for a fear that people don't have language for yet. The fear that the world is changing faster than they can understand. I know, Elena said again. From outside the base perimeter, faintly audible even inside the hangar, there were voices.
Crowds.
The sound of the world processing something enormous, and not always processing it well. Paul Shute spoke up from the cluster of crew members. He was a big, quiet man from North Carolina, an engineer's engineer, the kind of person who resolved problems with his hands and said little that wasn't useful. What do we do? He asked. Elena looked at him. Then she looked at Sarah. Caro, she said. We tell the truth. All of it. Everything. No more controlled releases, no more managed disclosures. We go in front of cameras and we tell every single human being on the planet exactly what happened, exactly what we are, and exactly what we've brought back. And we trust them. What if they don't trust us back? Sarah asked. Elena's expression was steady and tired, and it was absolutely clear. Then we'll have lost before we started, she said. But I've spent 22 years with a civilization that bet everything on the idea that honesty is the only thing that builds trust that lasts. HFY. I'm not going to stop believing that now. Although it was officially termed a press conference, it was actually a different event. It was broadcast live on every major network in the world simultaneously. The United Nations had arranged translation into 62 languages in real time. Streaming platforms hosted it in addition to traditional TV. By the time it started, the estimated simultaneous audience was 3.8 billion people, nearly half the human race, watching together. Elena sat at a plain table with no prepared remarks. Ray sat beside her. 3 other crew members, Dr. Marcus Webb, mission pilot James J.T. Torres, and environmental scientist Dr. Priya Nair, sat with them. The table had water glasses. The chairs were functional and unremarkable. It was as different from a government press briefing as it could possibly be, and that was intentional. Sarah watched from off-camera. She had been offered a seat at the table. She had declined. This is their story, she had told Director Colt. Let it be theirs. Elena began. She started from the beginning, the launch, the fold, the arrival. She described their first view of the inhabited planet in plain language that made no attempt to be scientific or official. She described the first contact the way Ray had described it to Dana. 3 beings, patient and curious, floating in space and waiting to see what the humans would do. She described the 4 months spent building a shared language. The first real conversation. The invitation to the surface came a year earlier. The surface itself, the violet sky, the living cities, the absolute absence of poverty or waste or violence. She described the offer they were given. Not to take human civilization and transform it by force, but to share knowledge. To give humanity the tools to solve its own problems if it wanted them. They did not give us these things because they thought we deserved them, Elena said clearly. They gave them to us because they believed we had the capacity to use them well, if we chose to. That choice is not theirs to make. It is ours. She described the technology, every system, plainly, in terms that a person without a science background could understand. Energy, without fuel. Medicine adds centuries to a human's life. Materials that build themselves and never degrade. Food systems that can end hunger without destroying land. Climate technology that can begin reversing the damage already done to Earth's atmosphere within a decade. She described the medical treatments she and 38 of her crew had accepted. She did not apologize for it. She did not minimize it. She said, quietly and clearly, I chose this. I am still the same person who left Earth. I am a changed version of that person, the way every person changes over 22 years of living. I am also a person who will, if things go as the treatments suggest, live for another 300 years or more. I want to spend those years here, on Earth, with you. She described the 4 civilizations that had destroyed themselves. She described the pattern that those civilizations all shared. She looked into the camera directly without flinching and said, we are in that pattern right now. I am not telling you this story to frighten you. I am telling you because the rememberers have watched this enough times to know that the civilizations who made it through were the ones who were told the truth early enough to do something about it. Then she stopped. She took a slow breath. We did not bring back a gift, she said. We brought back a choice. You can take what we've brought and use it, or you can be afraid of it, or you can fight about who gets to control it, or you can do all 3 at once, which is probably what will happen initially because we are humans and that is what we do. But eventually, and I believe this completely, eventually the better part of us will win. It always has, by the narrowest margins and at the last possible moment, but it always has. HFY and HFY, she said. From now on, this is where it starts, not in some distant future when we've sorted ourselves out. Right here, right now, amidst all our chaos, fear, and stubbornness. She paused one final time. The rememberers will be watching, she said. I think they're rooting for us. She stopped. For a moment there was no sound. Then, in the press room, someone began to clap. And then everyone began to clap. And in living rooms and phone screens and tablets across the world, 3.8 billion people sat with what they had just heard and began, slowly, unevenly, imperfectly, to process the fact that the world had changed. The year after the Meridian landed was the hardest year in recent human history and also, depending on who you asked and what you measured, the most extraordinary. It went both ways at once, the way big things always do. In the first 3 months, there were protests in 42 countries, some against the technology, some demanding immediate access to it, and some that were really about something else entirely and were just using the Meridian as a convenient focus for existing anger. 2 governments fell. 1 new alliance formed between 5 nations that had never formally cooperated. The United Nations held 17 emergency sessions. There were people who believed Elena and Ray and the crew completely and immediately. There were people who believed none of it and said so loudly and without ceasing. There were people who believed the technology was real, but thought it should be controlled by their specific government or institution or ideology. There were people who thought the lifespan extension was an abomination. There were people who thought it was the most important development in human history. There were, inevitably, people who tried to steal things. 3 separate espionage attempts were made on the specifications Elena had brought back. 2 were caught quickly. 1 succeeded in obtaining incomplete documents that turned out to be unusable without the calibration data that remained secured. Elena had predicted all of it. This is the messy middle, she said to Sarah one evening, sitting in the small office they had set up for her on the base. The remembers told us about the messy middle. Every civilization that made it through had one. A period of maximum chaos after a transformative event, before the new equilibrium begins to form. It's actually a good sign in a perverse way. How is it a good sign? Sarah asked. Because the civilizations that went straight from transformation to collapse didn't have a messy middle, Elena said. They had a quiet middle. They suppressed the chaos instead of working through it. Suppression is stable until it isn't, and then it's catastrophic. So chaos is preferable, Sarah said. Chaos is real, Elena said. Real is preferable. Sarah had moved her office to Edwards permanently by then. Her daughter Lily had come to visit and had spent 2 hours on the ship and come out with the expression of someone who has just had a conversation that rearranged everything they thought they knew and had called Sarah 3 days later to say she wanted to study materials science. Her ex-husband Mark had sent Sarah a long email, which she had read twice and not yet replied to. The technology releases were happening in a carefully orchestrated sequence, managed by an international consortium that Elena had insisted upon and that had taken 3 months of negotiation to assemble. Each system was released with full documentation to all member nations simultaneously, with additional support teams trained by the Meridian crew to assist in implementation. The first zero-point energy condenser prototype was tested at a facility in Nevada in month 4. It worked. It worked exactly as specified, first try, in front of 400 scientists from 30 countries. The footage of the test, a condenser the size of a shipping container powering a temporary city of emergency lights and equipment, running continuously for 72 hours without any fuel input, without any emissions, without any degradation in output, was viewed approximately 9 billion times in the first week. After that, the protests began to quiet. Not all of them. Not completely. But the quality of the argument changed from "this is impossible and dangerous" to "how do we make sure this is shared fairly," which was a harder and more important conversation, and one that humans were at least somewhat practiced in having. Dr. Marcus Webb set up the first human trial of the longevity treatment at a research hospital in Boston in month 6. 40 volunteers, all of them elderly, all of them with terminal or serious degenerative conditions, all of them with full understanding of what they were consenting to. The results over the following months were, Sarah didn't have a better word for it, miraculous. Not in a supernatural sense. In the sense of what is possible when you apply 40,000 years of accumulated medical knowledge to a problem. Ray Cole wrote his book. It was 800 pages long, and he wrote it in 4 months, and it was published simultaneously in 60 languages, and it was the best-selling book in human history within 2 weeks of publication. He donated all proceeds to an organization working to implement the Remember's food system technology in regions of Africa and South Asia most severely affected by climate-related food insecurity. You could have made billions, Tom Reyes said to Ray at a dinner at the base one evening. Ray shrugged. I spent 22 years learning what a civilization looks like when it figured out how to actually be a civilization, he said. I'm not going to go home and act like I didn't learn anything.
Caro.
Here the shape of the new world began to become visible. Not complete, not by a long stretch, but visible, like a building whose scaffolding is coming down, and you can see for the first time what the structure underneath it really looks like. 8 months after the Meridian landed, Sarah Voss called her daughter. Not for their regular Sunday call. On a Wednesday, which she never did. Lily picked up on the first ring. Mom? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Sarah said. I wanted to talk to you. Not about work. A brief silence. Okay, Lily said carefully. Sarah was sitting on the steps outside the hangar. It was evening. The desert was doing what it did in the evenings, turning colors, gold and amber and deep red, the sky going from blue to a deeper blue at the horizon. The Meridian sat inside the hangar behind her. She could feel it, the faint warmth of it through the wall, the barely there vibration that she had come to find comforting over the months, the way you find the heartbeat of a sleeping person comforting. I've been thinking about something Elena told me, she said. The Rememberers, they don't just record scientific knowledge. They record personal knowledge too. Individuals' lives, their thoughts, their emotional histories, not for posterity or vanity. Because they believe that a civilization is only as wise as the sum of its individual people's experience, and that you can't separate scientific progress from human emotional truth. That's beautiful, Lily said. She told me that each of the crew members wrote what they called a life account while they were away, Sarah said. A full examination of everything they thought they knew, everything they'd gotten wrong, everything they wished they'd done differently, and what they wanted their remaining time to be used for. Did she share hers? She showed me the first page, Sarah said. Just the first page. It started with, I am 61 years old, and I have perhaps 300 more years to live. I do not intend to spend them the same way I spent the first 61. Lily was quiet for a moment. Are you thinking about writing yours? Sarah looked at the sky. I think I already am, she said. That's what this call is. I want you to know, and I haven't said this in the right way, maybe ever, that I know the years when you were growing up, I was more present here. She gestured at the desert around her, the work, all of it. Then I was at home. And I told myself it was important work, which it was, and I told myself you understood, which you did, but understanding isn't the same as it being okay. And I would like to mention that I'm sorry for the parts where it wasn't okay. Silence on the line.
Mom, Lily said.
Her voice was soft. I've been waiting 8 years to hear you say that. Sarah felt the burning in her eyes again. She let it stay this time. I know, she said. I know. HFY, Lily. From now on. They talked for 2 hours. They discussed topics that had remained unspoken for years. About Lily's work, about the materials science program she was applying to, about the future, about what the world was going to look like in 10 years and 50 years and 100 years, and about whether it was terrifying or incredible to be alive in this exact moment in history.
Both, Lily said.
Obviously both. Yeah, Sarah said. Obviously both. After she hung up, she sat on the steps for a while longer. Behind her, Elena's voice drifted out through the open hangar door. She was briefing a new team of engineers, her voice steady and clear and patient the way it always was when she was teaching. Out in the desert, the coyotes were starting their evening noise. The stars were coming out.
Sarah looked up at them.
Somewhere out there, 12 light-years away, in the outer reach of an unnamed star system, a civilization of 40,000 years was watching. Patient and curious. Rooting for the stubborn, messy, brilliant, frightened species that had just stumbled into the universe's larger neighborhood and was trying, with everything it had, to be worthy of the welcome. She felt, for the first time in a very long time, something she recognized as hope. Not the soft kind, not the kind that turns its face away from what's hard and calls itself optimism. The other kind, the kind that knows exactly how difficult the road is and decides to walk it anyway. The kind that has its eyes fully open. The challenging kind, the real kind, the kind that lasts. 5 years later. The following letter was read into the public record of the United Nations General Assembly in the year 2046, submitted by Commander Elena Rodriguez on behalf of the crew of the U.S. Meridian. It was subsequently translated into every major language on Earth and distributed through all available channels. It is considered by historians to be one of the foundational documents of what came to be called the Second Era of humanity. To every human being alive. We have been home for 5 years now. Some of us have spent those 5 years in laboratories and lecture halls. Some have spent their time in policy rooms and negotiating chambers. Some have spent them raising children, healing old relationships, and learning what home means after 22 years away from it. Some, like Ray, spent theirs writing because some of us are built to record things, and we believe now, more than ever, that recording things is not a small act. It is how civilizations remember who they are. 5 years ago, we came back with technology that could change everything. You have used it. Imperfectly, beautifully imperfectly, the way all human things are imperfect. You have used it. The first full-scale zero-point energy installations are operational on 4 continents. The climate restoration program has begun, and the data shows that the atmosphere is beginning to correct, albeit slowly. The longevity treatments are in Phase 3 trials globally, available now in 17 countries and expanding. Hunger in the regions most affected by climate-driven food failure is down 40% in 3 years. That is not a miracle. That is people choosing, with all the difficulty that entails, to share what they have. We will not tell you that the hard part is over. The remembers told us something about long games. The beginning of improvement is when most civilizations stop. They want better. Because better becomes the new normal, complacency returns, and the long work of staying vigilant is exhausting. We are asking you not to stop. We are asking you to remember, always, every generation, without ceasing, what was at stake and what was chosen and what it cost and what it saved. We are asking you to be rememberers. The beings who taught us would not call themselves our saviors. They would say that salvation, if it comes at all, is always an inside job. They gave us tools. The hands that hold the tools are yours. There is a phrase, borrowed from a language spoken in a city called Lahore, in a country called Pakistan, on a planet called Earth, in a solar system that one civilization spent decades pointing toward before they decided we might be worth a conversation, that has stayed with us through 22 years and 5 years back and all the years still ahead. Of SYMJHY. From now on, that is all we can give you in the end. The beginning. This is the point at which everything transforms, provided you decide to make it so. The moment, this moment, always this moment, where the past is what it was and the future is not yet written, and you are here, alive, with everything still possible. We were lost for 22 years. We came home, Caro, and here the real journey starts. With love, faith, and everything we have. Commander Elena Rodriguez and the crew of the UES Meridian.
The end.